Dripping sounds woke Sam early Tuesday morning, same every day for 3 weeks gone, making Sam think of old prison movies. He rolled off the squeaky top bunk, careful not to hit his head on the hanging pipes of the church basement. He dressed quickly in clean, durable layers and went upstairs to the nice part of the church without turning any lights on. He used the bathroom on the main floor before the doors were unlocked for the public. Pale morning sunlight showed through the windows, staining everything with blue glow. He went back downstairs where 2 other missionaries were already preparing a breakfast of cold cereal and fresh fruit. Sam joined them. They all leaned against the countertops, eating quickly. Sam made no small talk, staring down at the pink and white tile and its years of washed and replaced grime. As more 20-somethings emerged from sleeping, a faint chatter started. Like timid birds, Sam thought. He finished breakfast, made his bed, and brushed his teeth. Finished with his morning personal chores, it was time for morning devotional. Sam picked his book up and sat on a high stool in a circle of found couches and chairs that served as a living room for transient team members. He reread the same passage he had been reading every day since his now ex-girlfriend Emily had transferred out of their mission team and told the story. Sometime around 30 AD, Jesus of Nazareth was in Jerusalem playing with the children, and a group of Pharisees came upon him. He saw they were there, and they saw that he saw them. He did not speak to them. Instead, he looked at the children, smiled, and said, "Would you like to hear a story?" The children approved excitedly. "Very well," he said. There was a father who had 2 sons, and he went to the first and told him, "My son, go and work in the vineyard." And the son said, "No," but later thought better of it and went to work. The father went to his second son and asked him the same question, and the second son obliged in word, but did not do the work. Once more, a little boy smiled and replied readily, "The first." Jesus looked squarely into the eyes of the elder Pharisee and repeated, "The first." Sam was supposed to go out with 2 other people. He hadn't signed up with the group for the past 2 days. He left before mission team leaders could confront him about it. Sam set out on foot to the BART station with $115 in his pocket, $100 more than the suggested daily allotment from the ministry. Suggested to better understand the needs of the poor, and Sam carried tourist money. The train ride into San Francisco proper was being shorter each time. The sights familiar and approaching banal. Still, Sam looked out the window, and his faint reflection against the grimy glass, he saw that his beard had gotten longer and moss-like than he'd ever let it, and his mud eyes were dull but still warm. His hair was dark, and his face was bright and young, and held a mute exhaustion that hadn't been there for weeks enough. He mumbled a prayer out of habit. "Dear Father, please make me the salt of the earth." He got off the train and switched over to the Union bus line to work his way deeper into San Francisco. Sam's stop was South Van Ness and Market, one of the shiniest, busiest parts of the city. His guide compared it to Disneyland with twice the idolatry and better rides. From there, he wandered in the direction of the Tenderloin Poor District and considered getting a pack of cigarettes. The smell of other smoke fell over him with the undercurrent of hot grease and early morning pot and garbage stink that cloaked the Poor District. He hadn't smoked in a month, didn't feel like he had cravings. He bought his old brand, noting the high tax, and didn't open the package right away. Sam kept walking, feeling the gentle slope of streets that hinted at the drastic steepness close to the center of town, where San Francisco rose to a high and majestic point, allowing a view of all surrounding. He'd seen bike messengers scream down those 50% inclines and miraculously keep their tires straight. He doubted he could ever attain the sheer physical agility necessary for the feat. He stopped far up a side street, taking several moments to figure out where he was. He turned away from the crowds of Market and onto the Mission Street at some point, and had almost walked all the way to the Chronicle building. Leaning against a bare wall, he looked at people walking by. He kept looking hard. He stood there for almost an hour waiting for something to present itself, and he thought about getting a sandwich, and decided it would be a better use of his time, so he walked toward a cluster of restaurants. He looked down at the well-kept sidewalks to avoid others' eyes. The cadence pat and his own footsteps filled his ears, fighting off every thought with the simple 1-2, 1-2 of forward motion. And then it was interrupted, softly at first, so the same thought he could just wait it out. But the new rhythm persisted. Sam was annoyed, though he knew he shouldn't be. He discovered the break in his reverie walking in front of him, a small man slightly hunched in baggy clothes with a beanie stretched down over his head to hide his hair. Sam thought he looked homeless, probably hungry. More than anything, he looked tired. Sam felt bad for having thought of the man as nothing more than an intruder to his navel-gazing. The man would be none the wiser if Sam had simply stopped walking, but Sam cleared his throat and asked the man like a friend, "Hi, how are you?" The man kept walking, and Sam asked the man again, a little louder while he caught up to him. It took the man a moment to realize Sam was talking to him. In the awkward silence that followed, he and Sam sized each other up. Their clothes were equally haphazard. Sam had more of them in a small backpack. The tired man wore a baggy woven sweatshirt with his pockets full of his few trifling possessions. They both had beards. The tired man's thicker and more tangled than Sam's and lightly peppered with gray. "I'm all right," the man replied, not the least bit apprehensive about being greeted by a stranger. "My name's Sam. Wesley White." Sam felt strange standing there, so he offered to buy Wesley lunch. Wesley considered the proposition mildly surprised. "Okay," he said. They started walking in the direction Sam chose. He was thinking of restaurants in the area that he had seen and been to during group activities. While he pictured a map in his head, part of him realized that he had been silent for about 3 minutes. "Wesley, where are you from?" Wesley took a moment to answer, jarred at the stark break in silence. "I'm from all over the place. Before here, Sacramento. Before that, different places in New Mexico. I've been on the road for about 17 years now." Sam surveyed him again. Wesley didn't look very old, and from what Sam had seen, years on the street usually counted double on the outside. "That's a nice belt buckle." Wesley was commenting on the large metal buckle Sam had inherited from his grandfather. A plain thing. It was still large enough to draw attention from strangers. "Yeah, it was my grandpa's." Sam rubbed it casually with one hand and tried to think of more to say, but decided not to tell Wesley he had inherited the belt buckle after his grandfather's suicide. Sam remembered a man who had lived mostly for his wife, and when she died, so did he. Wesley reciprocated by showing his own belt buckle. "This is my only really earthly possession." Wesley drew his sweater up to reveal a steel figure mounted on a cinched piece of leather around a skeletal wraith of a man. "When I saw it in a store, I just knew I needed it. I saw it below the glass and said, 'That one.'" He chuckled quietly with his barrel lungs. Sam nodded and gazed upon the chunk of hammered metal bearing a resemblance to a human skull with great horns. He was unfazed by the demonic image. "Danzig had one just like it when I saw him in concert," Wesley continued. "You know Danzig, right? The Misfits?" Yeah, Sam had never really listened to harder music. They walked into a McDonald's after Sam asked Wesley if it was all right by him, and it was. "What would you like to eat?" Wesley's feet were sore and he had a headache. "Whatever you're getting is fine." Sam knew that what Wesley was doing when he pulled his eyelid tread across his cornea to stretch into a shape suitable for seeing the faraway words on the menu. Sam asked if he was allergic to anything, and Wesley told him no allergies, and felt like he was in a doctor's office. The food came quickly. Sam retrieved it and sat down. Next to them, a man in a dirty white shirt was taking a nap. The bag in front of him had been torn open to create a private space for his meal. "You do this a lot?" Wesley asked, gingerly opening his sandwich. "Sort of. I'm out here with a service group. We do lots of different things, mostly just try to be nice. You part of a church or something?" Sam chuckled because he couldn't hold it back. "Well, not personally. I joined up because of a girl." Wesley smiled. "I know how that goes. I came here with her. Very religious, but she's good at not rubbing your face in, you know." "I know." Wesley answered absently. They began to eat with utility. Sam eventually asked Wesley about himself. This had been one of Sam's favorite parts about working with the destitute. So many told great stories. Wesley obliged with a description of the events in his life that had led him to that point. There were inaccuracies and questionable events, and all were described in vivid detail. Wesley was 40 by his own recollection. He had grown up the son of a military man and the older brother of a highly successful real estate agent. He himself had been smart but never very good with schoolwork. He had thought of joining the military, passed all the tests, but he told them straight that he had a problem with authority. The recruiting officer reminded Wesley that in the military he would be expected to follow orders as holy written. He gave him half an hour to think it over. Wesley left the recruitment office after 20 minutes. Wesley had been diagnosed and passed treaty for bipolar disorder. He was quick to point out that while he could function well, his girlfriend could not. He didn't say her name, only that she was his Abraxas, the fiery spectacle. Sam was impressed by the reference. Wesley had apparently read Carl Jung. In travels with his girlfriend, Wesley had met the supposed son of Anton LaVey, whom he called Stanton LaVey. Stanton had lured Wesley and his Abraxas back to the apartment and forced them to participate in a satanic ritual. Both had barely escaped by Wesley's recollection. He was waiting on some money to come in through the mail so he could bail her out of jail in Sacramento and find a place to stay for a while. After this part of the story, he changed gears quickly from his past to his present. "There's a singer named Marilyn Manson. You heard of him?" Sam nodded. "Well, he's kind of a demonic figure, you know. His name begins with the letters M and M and upside down. That's WW for Wesley White. I always thought of that. I was born on Halloween. I always thought of that. You know, there's always been weirdness surrounding me." For the first time, Sam saw some of the mania in Wesley's eyes. It didn't frighten him. He hadn't seen anything that real in weeks. Coming from anyone else, Sam would have regarded Wesley's suggestions to his unholy nature as the token rambling of a self-obsessed metalhead. Hearing the words and the man's voice, he knew what Wesley believed. He knew that to Wesley it was true, and he was jealous of the strength and reliability of that belief. Sam recalled a passage from John's Gospel. Deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have gone out into the world. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Sam thought of this as he looked at Wesley, and failing to lock eyes with the man to a reflection of himself in a toy display case behind him, there was a break in Wesley's story long enough that Sam could ask a question without interrupting. What do you do if things work out, Wesley? Where will you go? Wesley thought on that. Well, that's a good question. Eyes as wide as mouths on good. Sometimes I get worried that I'm cursed, or when people are around, I'll hurt someone. I try to stay away from people, you know. Sam tried carefully. You seem pretty low, but I guess I just met you on the street. You don't talk like a missionary. Wesley smirked a little. The look in his eyes intensified. Sam laughed softly, and his mind drifted for a moment. Wesley turned the table. So how long have you been out here, Sam? Sam took inventory of himself. 3 weeks now. You must be getting your fill of San Francisco. Wesley rubbed his temple and stretched his skin across his bones. I've gotten pretty familiar with the streets. Wesley asked, have you seen the Golden Gate Bridge yet? Sam shook his head and muttered, it's the #1 suicide destination in the world. Wesley cocked his head slowly. Really? That's kind of weird. The sleeping man next to them awoke from his after-meal nap and looked quizzically at Sam. Sam glanced at the confounded man for a moment and then turned back to Wesley with purpose. Have you ever seen it? He asked Wesley. Not in person. As though it were the most obvious thing in the world for a bipolar being and a tourist to do, Sam said, we should go. I mean, if you want to. He felt foolish in the moment he said it. Wesley considered for a moment, wincing in concentration. He took a short breath. Sure. How do you want to get there?
Without giving away the ending, some people will all go read it. Why is the title that?
Icon in the very traditional sense means a depiction of Jesus Christ, but we've broadened the meaning of our sense. And I had to think about what do we consider as icons and what defines an icon from a symbol, and where do you exist in this space and what does it mean to be an icon in the present day? So with that, other cryptic righty things, there are several alternate endings, and if you send me $5 in the mail, you can have it.